to the TFR Podcast. We are back once again today to have a little review of what happened in Austin last weekend, but mainly to preview the up-and-coming Mexican Grand Prix. Round 20 of the season. We are rapidly approaching the end of the championship now, and it is myself, CJH, joined by one of the OG guests on the podcast. Luke returns once more. How you doing, Luke? And are you looking forward to the Mexican Grand Prix this weekend?
Not doing bad. It's good to be joining here, not in the car. And yeah, I'd say I'm looking forward to the Mexican Grand Prix. We definitely always get a nice little bit of a mix up with the race, especially with that thinner air. And honestly, yeah, I think everything's going to be close this year. And honestly, just keep my fingers crossed for just something different. Obviously, we're still getting a little, we're getting a little bit of different stuff with Verstappen catching up. But I mean, like, I really hope to see something we don't expect. Like, I hope to see another sour podium. I hope to see the Aston Martins flying. Like, I really got my fingers crossed. This will be a good race.
Yeah, because like you say, this is obviously a very different kind of track to most because of the high altitude. We don't really see much engine difference these days, obviously, because a lot of the engines are balanced in F1, with them being so close on performance. But it still will have an effect on the aerodynamics, and we could see some surprises in Mexico City. But obviously, in the past, this has been a serious Red Bull hunting ground. Verstappen and Red Bull have picked up many, many victories at this circuit. But the question is, will that continue this weekend? We'll get into that a little bit later on in the podcast. But we're going to start off with some analysis of the results from the US Grand Prix. And it was indeed that man, Max Verstappen, who dominated in Austin every single session, you'd have to say. Top of the timing boards in the practice sessions, the qualifyings, and then top of the race results as well in both the sprint and the main race, and has really now closed down that gap in the championship. He is catching Piastri, he's catching Norris at rapid rates, and he's actually scored the same amount as the two McLaren drivers in the last 4 races. Luke, what are your thoughts? It's the big question. We put out a thing earlier in the Discord. What are your questions for this week's podcast? And that was the main question. Will Max Verstappen win his 5th World Championship, and can he catch the McLaren's?
At this point, I don't want to rule him out. If you asked me like 3 races ago, I honestly would have said it would be a lot harder. He's looking really, really good, and he's looking real, real consistent, and he's looking comfortable. And that's something I got to say. Neither of the McLaren drivers I feel like that's something neither of the McLaren drivers can say. Neither of them really look comfortable right now. We definitely saw Lando Norris feeling a bit more confident, but they both know how close they are. Norris at this point has to focus on holding back Verstappen, and then Piastri has to worry about holding back Norris and Verstappen. Has to worry about holding back the other two. So I don't know. I think it's 50-50 at this point in time. I really think that the McLaren still have the car. I looks like that the Red Bull might be even at this point in time, but that point gap is something to still consider. And Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri have still proven that they can be competitive on a weekend. But unfortunately, honestly, Austin wasn't the weekend for Piastri. Like, just want to hop down that vein. It was not great for him, and that's what I'm talking about with the comfort. It's like with Verstappen putting in performances like these, like Piastri really has to pick it up a little bit.
Yes, he's seriously on the back foot, and he has been really since the summer break. You've got obviously the likes of Verstappen who have been on the up since the summer break. You could maybe also say Norris as well, but not quite to the same extent, obviously. But Piastri has absolutely been on a bit of a downward run at the minute. He's in a bit of a rot, we'd have to say now, in terms of the standards that he's had all season. And I really thought, Luke, he was this perfect kind of cold killer driver, a little bit like Kimi Räikkönen that I've said so many times before, where he will not make the mistake. He won't crack under the pressure because that's not what he's shown so far. But now, when we've reached this crunch point of the season, you'd have to say in the last few races, like I say, since the summer break, he really hasn't been at that same level as before. And it really kind of obviously started with Baku. Monza wasn't quite on the pace, but that's fine. You can have some races where you're not winning all the time, obviously. But Baku, where he had the crash in qualifying, the jump start, and then a crash in the race, really just started this bad run of form. And then again, with this big crash in the sprint race, which was a bit of a debate initially in terms of who was at fault, and even Zach Brown was chucking a load of blame at Nico Hülkenberg, who had a great qualifying and then got involved in this incident in the sprint. But I think everyone, even including Zach Brown in the end, admitted that Piastri was probably a little bit naive just to cut back under Norris. What was your take actually on that isolated incident there, Luke? What did you think about that? For a bit of filler here, obviously it was at the start of the sprint, first corner, very tight corner at Austin, uphill as well. And you had Norris and Piastri side by side. Norris outbroke Piastri a little bit just to get that inside line. Piastri cut back underneath, causing a big old clash. And obviously Piastri's car going up into the air and into Norris's car. Who did you blame for it?
Ultimately, that would have been on Piastri. The whole thing is like everyone was a little bit upset at Norris for Singapore with FIA rules. This almost would have been right back at Piastri. It was a little bit too aggressive, and ultimately, I do think it lands on Nico Hulkenberg at the end of the day. But if he hadn't been involved in that, totally would have been, that all would have been Piastri. It's just the way it ended up. It's just the way that it ended wasn't quite the way wasn't quite the way the corner started. It's definitely, I would say, I wouldn't say it's harebrained, but it wasn't the smartest move from Piastri, especially at the start of the sprint when you need that data because you're not getting those other practice sessions. It really kind of, I think it's almost his fault that they had kind of a poor weekend because they weren't able to get any data at all from that entire sprint race or learn anything about the tire wear. And especially if Piastri might have had a better weekend if he hadn't basically caused that at turn one in the sprint. So yeah, it was it just wasn't a smart move at all. Like that's what I'm talking about. Didn't look like he was comfortable.
Yeah, and you forget in some sense that this is a man who's just in his third season in F1, as in full season, and there are still learnings here for him in terms of racecraft and other things that other drivers that are at the end of their career or in their peak years obviously have already gone through those rough steps. That many take time. Look at someone like Kimi Antonelli. Obviously, he's in his first season, but he's right at the beginning of that journey where he's got a lot to learn.
Right.
And Piastri is still at the beginning, you'd have to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a little bit of a silly move that almost you could see in some sense he's got caught up in the moment there. He's been caught up in the moment of racing Norris. And he's forgetting there's a bunch of other cars steaming into the same corner as well. And that is what happened in the end. It all was a bit of a mess. And not often we see that in the sprint race, by the way. We don't really see big crashes like that because most of the time everyone's playing it pretty safe. But that seemed to go out the window for this one. Finally.
I'd say so.
But it obviously opened the door for Max to just cruise off into the distance. We had George Russell have a little look down the inside, let's say, and gave it a go, but I don't think anyone was going to beat Max in that sprint race, and it applied the same for the main race as well. But a bit more on Oscar Piastri, though. What would you say are the reasons here, Luke, for his real downturn in form? Because he was looking so comfortable, particularly after Zandvoort, after that DNF for Norris, and then now he really is looking uncomfortable. He's really feeling the pressure now with, 5 rounds to go, whatever it is. It's looking like a bit of a struggle for him to get to the end of the season and get this championship.
Honestly, I'm not sure. That's the hardest part is like I'm not sure what changed. He still is finishing pretty well. That's the whole thing. It's like honestly, it really is just the past how many races at this point? I'm trying to remember how long ago Baku was. Um Yeah, Baku was only 3 races ago. Okay, I'm not going crazy. Yeah, it's like it really is just from Baku forward that things have been so poor. He's has been doing well really up until now. And that's the whole problem. It's like Baku DNF, or he didn't finish below, or let's see. Okay, yeah. Last time he finished below third was in Canada up until Baku, right? He finished fourth in Canada, and then every single other position besides Australia was first, second, or third. And then suddenly we get to Baku where he DNF'd. Now he's gotten fourth and a fifth. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know if Baku specifically threw off his confidence, if there was some sort of, I don't remember if there was an upgrade package or something else that got brought along, but that's the thing. I don't know at this point. Like, it's really, really confusing to me because he's had a super solid season up until now. Maybe it's just his qualifying performance hasn't, maybe his qualifying performances haven't been quite up to snuff. I know at Baku he qualified pretty poorly. I think he qualified like like close to the bottom of like close to the bottom like P9 or P10. And we keep going on from there. I think that's kind of the only explanation I have right now. Otherwise, it's really is kind of a mystery to me.
Yeah, because something I've thought about as well is obviously last season at this part of the championship, he went on a bit of a rough run of form as well. He had a really good run again for those middle races of the season where he won his first race in Hungary, won in Baku as well, and was really looking, like a bit of a threat, if you like, in terms of an outsider, in terms of the standings. But then he reached, I think it was Singapore, and then that was a bit of a run of poorer, shall I say, results last season, and he
Yeah.
didn't really get a good result I can remember off the top of my head for the rest of the 2024 season. But then obviously that reset going into this season, and bang, was straight on the pace. But
Mhm.
I don't know. Maybe there's something to read in that. Maybe I don't know. Maybe there's a bit of, again, a young driver just maybe getting a bit burnt out. I don't know. Maybe just isn't quite able to hit that peak performance as consistently as he
Mhm.
gets near the end of a long season. We have to remember as well. It is a long championship, but it's a real mystery, isn't it, Luke? I mean, could if he does lose a championship, is it all about that Baku result, or is this a bigger picture than just simply that?
It's definitely a bigger picture than just that. I think it's just his qualifying has been off, and I'm not sure what kind of took that from him. It really is weird, but last time he outqualified Norris in Singapore, which is great, but
Yeah,
ultimately like he wasn't able to turn that third place, he wasn't able to turn that qualifying, into anything more. He ended up ultimately losing a position to his teammate Lando and, dropped down to fourth ultimately. Like, I don't know. I think the qualifying has something to do with it, or there's been some other late stage development that has just thrown him off. And once again, maybe it's just that Max Verstappen factor, you never really can tell. He puts on, I mean, arguably Max Verstappen is probably the hardest guy to deal with pressure from, because he's always going to be on your ass. But that's all I got. It's just I got my fingers crossed for him because I do want him to win a championship. And honestly, I would almost be happier if he won it instead of Lando still. But it's going to be really tough at this point.
well, speaking of Lando, he obviously has had a good run of results in terms of versus Piastri, but he himself obviously hasn't won recently because of obviously Verstappen winning these bunch of races in a row now. But
Right.
for Norris, I mean, this is working out quite nicely for him because he's starting to just close that gap in once again. And you'd have to say McLaren have definitely been caught here a little bit on certain tracks. I think again that car suits certain circuits like it does for everyone else. But they have been caught up a little bit by their rivals, and we have to obviously factor in that they've basically been like, well, you know what, we've got the constructors, we've got the quickest car for most of the season, we do not need to develop this anymore, which is absolutely fair enough. But for the
Yeah.
drivers' championship, this is where it started to cause a bit of problems because of the shock for me of Kota was the fact that Ferrari were in the mix. They were right there in terms of podium territory, and
Oh
obviously
yeah.
Charles Leclerc scoring a podium in the end. But for most of that race, he was ahead of Norris and Piastri, obviously,
Mhm.
and Norris kind of had to work quite hard in the end to get that move done to an extent. He obviously was biding his time, and what we noticed with this, Luke, I would say, is that that's the element of the championship in play because Norris had multiple opportunities to just chuck it down the inside, but he obviously maybe didn't want to risk that when Charles
Mhm.
hasn't got anything to lose at all. But he got the move done. But is this maybe another element here of why we're seeing quite big swings now? Is that teams like Ferrari at a certain track like this, or it could be Mercedes like we had at Singapore, are starting to get better results?
It's definitely a part of it, yeah. Because it's like I mean, it's harder for me with Ferrari because we're not sure how much more development they have done on this year's car. Earlier this season, we had Leclerc pushing for further development and saying that he was very adamant that there was something to unlock still in this chassis. So it's kind of tough. I'm not quite sure if that how much of a part that they're playing, but it definitely has something to do with it, especially with the Mercedes. I mean, I definitely want to highlight the Mercedes too. Like George Russell has had a comeback, which has been crazy. I don't know if Ferrari has quite had the same comeback. It's like maybe maybe they've had a steady improvement, but I feel like George Russell just went woo just a little bit. So honestly, it's more the Mercedes for me than the Ferrari that's kind of causing a little bit of a shift right now.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, and I think that is the case that across the board, Mercedes seem to be the more consistent of the two, and we've obviously got this almighty scrap now for second in the constructors, if you can call it that, because it depends if
Right.
they actually want it. With obviously the development for next year, but I guess they all would rather take the pride of finishing ahead of the others. But it looks like Mercedes, dare I say it, are probably the favourite for that at the minute, as long as they get a bit of consistency. The problem is, though, is if Red Bull keep winning races with Max Verstappen, as George obviously said in the last race's press conference, he was saying, what was it, Team Verstappen instead of Red Bull, which I think is a very accurate thing to say. But
Right.
obviously, if he keeps winning races, the Mercedes do have to score quite a chunk of points. They can't just chill out here. Because, I mean, what would that take? At least, a podium from Russell and then Antonelli to get a bunch of points as well or something like that.
It's definitely possible. I mean, I think Mercedes could, take it, or sorry, Mercedes can definitely take it. But you're right; it does require Kimi consistently finishing in the points because Verstappen isn't wrong. Russell isn't wrong. It is kind of Team Verstappen, especially if we go into the driver's stand and see where Yuki Tsunoda is today. I think he's sitting
Yeah.
probably down in like 14th to I'd want to say 14th to like 17th. He hasn't gotten more than 50 points to his name this season, especially not with Red Bull. So with Kimi Antonelli, almost, his goal now is to crack triple digits. Like, yeah, I definitely think that Mercedes should have a fair shot at keeping that second and taking it at the end of the day. But it's going to be close. Verstappen you can never count him out at all. Like, he is always going to be up there. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Yuki obviously did have a better race in Kota because he was in the points with a seventh place finish. So a much
Mhm.
improved result for him and critical points, you'd have to say, because the talk is getting louder and louder now of the whole change around with those Red Bull seats. And I think we're pretty sure that Hadjar is going to be in that second Red Bull seat. It feels like every year, Luke, we have this conversation about the Red Bull and V Carb seats by this kind of point of the season. I feel like year on year, this is almost
Oh,
a
definitely.
tradition now. Because I remember a couple of years ago, we were talking about Ricardo and that whole seat there and, whether he would go to Red Bull. And then we were definitely talking about it last year with Lawson, at least. And then here we
Oh,
are
yeah.
again. We've got the talk again about that seat. But do you
The never ending
think
cycle.
exactly? I know we'll be talking about this when we're both old and grey with the way Red Bull go about their operations.
Gosh.
But what do you think though? Is Yuki gonna stay on the grid for next season? I mean, is he gonna be in the V carb or what? How do you see it playing out?
I think he should be. Yeah, if it was up to me, like, yeah, I would say he absolutely deserves to stay in the V carb. Has he put in the greatest of performances this year? No. Has he done better than I think Lawson would have at the end of the day? Probably. But it's like I don't think throwing it to Hadjar in a new generation with a brand new engine that they've never tested, like I don't think that's the right way to go because Hadjar himself, he's going to need a little bit of time to settle in. Like coming into a sophomore year, I wouldn't want to throw him straight into all this when what you're really going to need is a consistent driver who's going to be able to develop your car. And once again, is Yuki the proper person for that? I don't know, but I think he's going to be a lot better than trying to put someone like Lawson or Hadjar into the car next year. That's all I really got.
Yeah, I think I can definitely see they're going to put Hadger in that car. They've talked about it so much that they basically almost confirmed it. And I think they've said apparently Hadjar's driving style is a bit more similar compared to the other drivers in that Red Bull pool to Verstappen's, if you could even say that, because I think Verstappen has such a unique driving style. I don't think
Yeah.
you can kind of really take that into account, but we'll see, obviously. But I think the question is really for the RB team, do they go for a Lawson and Sonoda lineup where it's technically two failed Red Bull drivers, if you could go that harsh? I mean, they're not. Lawson obviously didn't get too much time in that top seat, and then Sonoda this season hasn't really had a proper fair crack of it, considering the way that car's been. But in terms of development, Luke, I guess what's going there. What I mean, Lawson's younger than Sonoda, I guess that goes in his favour. But both of them, what's the end goal? When obviously you've got Arvid Lindblad from F2, who is very young, obviously still only 18. And the question is there, does he need another year in F2 until he goes up?
I would say yes, he does. I'll address the first thing. I'll address the first question though. Do I imagine a Lawson and Sonoda lineup next year if Hadjar gets promoted? Honestly, no. I would expect one of them to get the boot, and honestly, I probably expect it to be Sonoda. But that's because
Yeah.
he would be no. That's because he never really was a Red Bull or sorry, he is a Red Bull grown driver, but he was mostly there because of the Honda backing. And without that connection anymore, there's been a lot of speculation, but I honestly think that really does play a very large part in who they chose. Um, as far as Arvid Lindblad coming in next year, I also don't think that's going to happen. Primarily just because he's not doing that well in F2, and that's not anything against him. And, maybe he would do a lot better in Formula One than in F2. But earlier in the season, we thought he was really, earlier in the season, we thought he was really up there. And honestly, as the F2 season has continued, I'd say he's just not as spectacular as everyone once thought. If they gave him an extra year, I don't think it would do anything but benefit him ultimately.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore, to be honest, because you look at someone like Ollie Behrman, who, okay, maybe not quite the same level in terms of peak potential that people are talking about here, but
Mhm.
he needed that second season in F2 to prepare him for F1. If you put Ollie Behrman in straight up from the get go, I think he would have probably been a bit too young anyway, but he wasn't quite there yet. He needed that extra year to prepare him, and you could even argue this season he's not quite been on it fully. And you could use Antonelli as another example of could maybe do with a little bit more time of prep. So yeah, I couldn't agree any more that I think a bit more time is needed for him. And I mean, I've seen again some of these rumors come up a little bit again today of Alex Palou being that other RB driver. What's your thoughts on that, Luke? Is that an outside bet maybe there to line up alongside Liam Lawson? I mean, it's not the most exciting lineup, I have to say.
I mean, I'd say it's an outside bet, but it's like if we're in a building, if they're out in the parking lot, I really don't see that happening. Honestly, as
Mm.
far as who they would move up the ladder, it's really hard to say. I mean, if they move anybody up, it's gonna be ultimately Arvid Lindblad, and that's just. But I think that's just the wrong move entirely. They need to keep him where he is and give him that last season to develop because I think Richard Verschoor is he still I don't remember if he's still technically under the red if he's still technically part of like the Red Bull Academy or not, but like Richard Verschoor is probably like at the release he had Red Bull connections for a while, but even now I don't think it would necessarily be the correct move for Red Bull. It's really tough, and they're kind of screwed themselves over by promoting Lawson into that Red Bull seat at the beginning of the season. Like it's totally screwed up everything from this. It's totally screwed up like their entire driver grid and step up program. It's like they've had to do this shuffling with Sonoda, and at this point, now Sonoda is underperforming, and it's just kind of a whole mess. Like they should have they should have gotten rid of. Uh, I mean, honestly, this goes back to last year with Perez. Like they should have gotten rid of Perez earlier, or done like put Ricardo in the car sooner, or not had him in the car at all last year, or all this other stuff. It's like they really kind of shot themselves in the foot, and it all goes back to 2020, basically 2024 at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of mistakes there that they're having to now kind of re-sort out, if you like, and then get themselves back on track, which they are doing, I guess, with Verstappen. And that's one thing you
True.
have to say. That is back to
Yeah.
how it was. And they've kind of steadily brought some more upgrades. They're bringing another upgrade for Mexico this weekend, and they're going all
It's
in here.
wild.
It seems though that,
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a small upgrade. It was just a little tweak on the already major upgrade that they brought for the floor before Monza. So I guess it's just little tweaks here and there. But maybe obviously the bigger picture here, maybe they accept that next year is just going to be a learning year with the new engine with Ford, and then prepare themselves for another go at the title in 2027. But moving on though, we'll tie off some things from the US Grand Prix and then fully move into the Mexico preview. I wanted to I said about Sonoda, and we talked about some of the other top teams, but there was some other good drives from the likes of Nico Hulkenberg, who had a great sprint qualifying. Obviously got took out, but then in the race, scored some solid points in 8th place. That was his first points, actually, since the British Grand Prix, where he scored his podium, which was quite surprising how long of a gap that was between those two. But then also had Ollie Behrman in 9th, which again was some good solid points for him. Not much, but it's again just some good results. And then Fernando Alonso, of course, rounding off the points as he always does. There was a few other incidents outside the points, really, that I was quite interested in. And obviously, your other teams like Williams, maybe not quite their day at the office. And we had a lot of teams trying the hard tyre, which again just seemed to not work at all at Cota. And again, another muck up from Pirelli in terms of really poor tyres that they selected for that weekend. But I wanted to talk about this little spat, if you like, with Colapinto and his team, Luke. I quite enjoyed it. That the move he sent down the inside of the wounded car of Gasly. I think he was suffering with some issues, but for the team to tell him, "Oh no, Franco, just hold position," and they were like 17th and 18th. I can't lie, Luke. I was raging when I heard that. I was like,
Ridiculous.
"What? You're having a laugh?" And I, was delighted to see him absolutely chuck it down the inside into the first corner and make that move on Gasly. And I quite like Pierre Gasly as well. But for Alpine there to tell him that when he is fighting to keep his seat in F1 and he's had a bit of a rough season as well, I thought that was a good moment from the USGP, Luke.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. I mean, Franco shouldn't be putting up with those kind of stupid, or I'm sorry, not even Franco. No driver should be putting up
Yeah.
with those kind of stupid team orders. It's like, yeah, you're fighting for 17th. You're not even fighting for 17th and 18th at that point. You're just sitting there. Like, you are, no offense to them, you're quite literally in the most pointless of positions. Like, why the hell would you give any team orders ever? Like, it's just so dumb. It really was a ridiculous call. Like, because if we had seen that in any other team, like it would have been just as ridiculous, And I don't know, it was really weird of Alpine to me to do that kind of thing. Fingers crossed that they kind of learned the lesson and knock it off at this point. But it was just dumb.
I mean, Alpine have just been a bit dumb, full stop, this season. I mean, they've just gone backwards, and they are absolutely the worst team. I mean, Pierre Gasly, his post-race interview, he looked a bit like lost, if you like, because they were
Oh yeah.
so bad this kind of chunk of the season, and there's no recovery obviously now. I mean, they go into Mercedes engines next season, maybe they can recover themselves a little bit, but it's not. It's looking bleak. And when you think we've
I
got,
think it's possible,
yeah,
but it's hard. It's like they've had besides last year, honestly, they've had a solid platform of a car, but they have always been hindered by the Renault engine. So I do have my fingers crossed that they'll be able to pick it up next year because there is still like a lot of their staff is still, obviously there's a lot of news earlier in the season, but a lot of their staff at the core team and that's not, that wasn't ever a part of the engine program. They're still dedicated to what they're doing.
oh yeah,
There's been a lot of talk about how they're still motivated and they still want to create a good car. And it's like the fundamentals on the Alpine are usually pretty okay. Like I wouldn't say that they're definitely not top of the grid kind of thing, but like if that Alpine had a different engine now, if they had that Mercedes or Ferrari engine or something, I honestly think that they would be up into the mid pack fighting again. Um, and I think that next year it could have that kind of impact. They're just gonna have to figure out, yeah, they're definitely have to figure out a little bit of, I don't know, like yeah, just the team order at this point because clearly there's something that's not working. Like I don't necessarily know if it's because of like ultimately if it's the lead like the ultimately it's the leadership like having mixed messages, not being able to be coherent and cohesive, but I just gotta say next year I still got my fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I can't wait for next year now. I've had so many dull races this season in particular. And again, Austin was another boring race. Really, again, because of strategy, I thought just lacked something. Like it was such a basic race in terms of tires. And, the cars, again, are so hard to race with. I mean, I'm really looking forward to next season just for the sake of something different because I can't believe I'm saying that about these regulations, Luke. I actually thought I had a bit of hope, but this season it's just gone down the pan, really. And, yeah, I think obviously what we'll be talking about next year is. Oh, well, this team, their engine's a bit bad, so, if only they had a better engine or only if they
Oh
had better
yeah.
aero, and then we'll be saying about that of like, oh, well, if only the cars were closer. But you know what? I'll take it. I'll take something different. And I don't know about you. I'm ready for the change.
No, me too. I'm definitely ready for the change. If something is different, I mean, I hope ultimately it's just that everybody is closer and that the engine formula isn't as dependent as we think. Because, I don't want it to be the case where it is actually Mercedes far and away the best,
Mm.
or sorry, any Mercedes powered team far and away the best. Like, I don't want that. That's something that I hope is different is that there isn't a best engine supplier. Like, if one of them is unreliable, I hope they're all unreliable. If one of them is like super ultra powerful, I want them all to be super ultra powerful. I really don't want one team to just be far and away the best and just blow everybody else out of the water.
Yeah, the perfect balance is when they're all in reachable distance. Maybe at the start of the season, you've got
Yeah.
your better engines or your better teams with the aero. That always happens, but it just needs to be within reachable distance for others to recover. I mean, you got to only just look at a team like McLaren and how long they had to plug away to just get themselves a good engine in the back of the car during those hybrid years. And you think we had Jenson Button and Fernando Alonso as a lineup completely wasted because of just how bad the engine was. And yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I want to see that again. And I don't think we will. I think all the teams now are pretty good in F1, and I'd be shocked if someone gets it really badly wrong. But inevitably, there will always be one. But we'll save that for later in the year. We'll do a proper 2026 preview. Let's get back on track, and we're going to be looking at now the up and coming Mexican Grand Prix for this weekend. I actually think, Luke, this is one of the more underrated races on the calendar. I probably don't think about it much when it's not that particular week of the year. I'm not exactly thinking of the Mexican Grand Prix when it's March or February, but I think when it comes around, it's a great track for atmosphere, and it actually provides some pretty good racing in terms of when the conditions are right and the strategy's right again. And what I love about this track, Luke, is the starts. That run into the first
Oh yeah.
corner. Oh my! I mean, that must be almost the best on the calendar in terms of providing three wide, four wide into the first corner, and almost inevitably something always happens.
Oh yeah. I remember last year that was crazy. I remember watching the slow-mo shots of just the car flying by. There's always something very interesting, and I do hope that or I hope that nobody wrecks, but I do hope
Yeah.
that something interesting happens again this year.
Yes. Well, we're on a bit of a streak in terms of people crashing at the first corner because that was. Remind me, who was that? Was that which car was that again? Was that Sonoda into the first corner or Lawson? Someone? It was an RB of some sort. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure,
I believe it was
or something
Sonoda.
like that. Yeah. But then the year before, it was obviously Perez with that big kind of in the air crash, which
Right.
everyone was not happy about. Even Leclerc was getting booed on the podium, into the people at the track supporting obviously Perez,
Mhm.
and then we've had many seasons where it's just been an absolute drag race into the first corner. Pole position in some sense doesn't matter too much, Luke, because you're going to get absolutely swamped.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna say it's basically inevitable at this point.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really hope that if we get something interesting. And I mean, it looks like so far, if we go by the practice results, which we really shouldn't, but if we go by the practice results, like it already looks different and it already looks like it might be a mix up again, kind of like in Austin. So I have my fingers crossed, that's for sure. I mean, I don't think that it's gonna be I don't think that a miracle is going to happen by any stretch of the imagination. But maybe we see the Ferraris being competitive again. Maybe we see the Saubers doing something unexpected. I don't know. I think it should be okay though.
Yeah, exactly. But if we have the scenario where there's a bit of a shunt in first corner, could again open the door for someone else to pick up the pieces. We have seen, though, when a team gets it right at this track, they seem to dominate quite badly here, because
Oh yeah.
we've seen some pretty huge win distances over the years. And I think part of that is to do with the nature of the circuit. I think that final sector, with how twiddly that is, it actually does affect some of the racing in the latter stages of the race, because it's actually really hard to follow through there when the tires are quite worn.
Oh
And obviously with
definitely.
the dirty air off these cars now, that's going to be even worse this year. But
Well, I mean, thin atmosphere though. That's the whole thing.
well, this is the thing. You got to have your stadium section, and if they were just whizzing through there, Luke, in one little straight,
Oof.
I mean, nobody would see them. But it would provide a better race for us. But I guess
Arguably, yeah.
it's the fans that make this race, so we probably have to just suck that one up. But we'll see. Hopefully, we get a good race. Um, I always remember actually those seasons when, do you remember when Hamilton won the championship here, and or something like that, and you had Ricardo was on pole, Verstappen on the front row, and Hamilton had this like unbelievable launch off the line, and then you had all of them wheel to wheel into the first corner, and then I think someone had their front wing clipped or something like that. It
Hmm.
that little chicane, I think that is one of the best bits of the season in terms of the start. Everyone trying to squeeze through that. I mean, if I've not sold that enough to anyone listening to this and not convinced with this weekend's race, then I don't know what else I have to say. But I'm looking forward to
Well,
it.
we definitely have two nice, we definitely have like two nice tonight, like two nice back to back kind of races. Like Coda and Mexico, it is a pretty good pairing to watch weekend by weekend. Like, granted, last week was a little boring, but usually it's two excellent weekends in a row.
Mm. I mean, obviously, last season, Luke, we had the big drama
Oh,
with
it was
Verstappen and
great.
Norris. I mean, you know, I'd be surprised if we have a similar thing like that this weekend, because obviously Verstappen's in a different situation now where he's not the defending driver. He needs to go win the race. He can't go and take
Hmm.
himself off the circuit. But obviously last season, that was when things reached a boiling point between Norris and Verstappen. Maybe we could see a little bit of that with Norris and Piastri. I mean, now these repercussions, or whatever they were, have been removed, Luke. Maybe it's all back on again, a bit of scrapping between the papayas.
I hope so. It should be close. And then, of course, I just want to give in one fair shout too. I really hope that the Williams do well this weekend. They've been they have definitely been impressing me recently. So I just want to say I got my fingers crossed for them too. Like, just it was a shame what happened with Carlos Sainz last week. Like, it ultimately was his fault there. But like, he was on for a great race, and I really hoping that Mexico kind of gives them an opportunity to get back up in the points again, like finish P5, P6 kind of territory. Just I'm really hoping.
Yeah, because also, obviously, I forgot to mention earlier, Carlos actually got a third place in the sprint race in Austin. So, again, really on a good run at the minute for the Spaniard. And yeah, I think Williams are a little bit hot and cold, I think, with certain races at the minute. You could say that for Alex Albon. He's kind of gone off the boil a little bit in terms of some of his recent performances, but they are quite comfortable in fifth in the constructors. Albon's actually not far off from Kimi Antonelli in the drivers, so if he can pick himself back up, he could actually just get that little position there. I'm interested in the little battle for sixth in the constructors as well. We've got Racing Bulls on 72 points, Aston Martin on 69, and then Sauber on 59. So that could be a bit of a freeway scrap for quite big
it has
prize
been all
money.
season. It's nice.
Any picks on that one, Luke? Who you think of those three?
I definitely want to say, I'm just gonna go ahead and put my belief in Sauber. Actually, I really think that recently they've been picking it up, and Gabriel Bortoleto and Hulkenberg have both been impressing me. And granted, Hulkenberg hasn't gotten points since, excuse me, since since Silverstone, but I honestly got my fingers crossed for them. I really have been impressed with just their just just their general team attitude and just like the vibes that come from them every weekend. Like even when the results aren't so great, I never feel like they're disappointed, and I never really feel any anger or sadness coming from them. It seems like everybody is just vibing and everybody's just getting along.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bortoleto, with Behrman scoring a couple points in Kota, he is now actually 19th in the standings, and the kind of if you discount the two Alpine kind of bat markers, if you like, if you want to say that, of Colapinto and Doohan from this season, Bortoleto somehow now found himself at the bottom of that pile, which really surprised me when I read that. So hopefully for him, he can kind of get a few points and put himself a bit higher up, because he doesn't deserve to be in that place, because I think he's actually had a good season. So let's just see. I think Alonso, for me, is probably doing enough to kind of secure Aston Martin that spot. I think he is actually been pretty good in recent times, and he'll be desperate to get to next season with Adrian Newey being in full flight and the Honda engine coming in. That'll be a team to keep an eye on. But
I really hope he doesn't have some PTSD.
Oh yeah, so I mean, he'll just be desperate, I think, at this point. That is for sure. But he is getting the results in at the minute. But the only other bit of news before we get into our predictions was we had a lot of reserve drivers, if you want to call them. They're not all rookies now, I guess, because they've all done a few of these FP1s before. But we had a ton of them in FP1, Luke. I mean, I'll rattle through the names here. We had Lindblad in the Red Bull, Award in the McLaren, Fiocco, if I say that correctly, in the Ferrari from obviously the WEC program. We have Fred Vesti in the Mercedes, Paul Aaron in the Alpine, Iwasa in the RB, Crawford in the Aston Martin, in Hirokawa, I think that's how I say that, in the Haas, and then Luke Browning in the Williams. So a real mix of drivers there, some of them very young, obviously, like Lindblad, some from obviously the WEC series and other kind of categories that teams are in. And anyone that stood out to you? I mean, they're all on quite different runs. It's FP1 as well, so there's not too much we can take from it. But any standouts?
I mean, Arvid Lindblad getting sixth is great, but I can't just say it's a standout kind of thing. It's an FP1 session. Most of the teams aren't really trying to push or anything like that quite yet. They're just trying to get that little bit. They're just trying to get the setup dialed in and get a baseline. So, good on Lindblad for getting that sixth, but it's nothing really exciting for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I wonder why they target Mexico for this, by the way. They do this every year. They shove a load of rookies in FP1 at Mexico for some reason.
I think it just has to do with a deadline. Like, I think they have to have a certain amount of FP1 sessions for rookies by a certain point. And I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to double check all that, but I know it's something like that.
See, the 1 year they eventually chuck a sprint at Mexico, then this might all go out the window, because then we'll only have one practice session. But I wouldn't mind seeing that, actually. I wouldn't mind a sprint race at Mexico. An extra start. I'd take that.
That would definitely be interesting, I'll tell you that.
Definitely more interesting than Zandvoort or Singapore next season. But I will resist myself from getting into that topic of conversation. Let's move on, though, to the predictions for the Mexican Grand Prix. And this again could be quite tricky, Luke. And it's been a while since we've done these, apart from obviously the last podcast, obviously, because you were here for that. So I will just recorrect myself on that. But we, as ever, we don't exactly have the greatest track record. Although I think we both said Verstappen was going to win in Kota. Did we say that? I can't remember off the top of my
I
head. But
do believe so.
yes.
I
So
think I think we did pretty okay.
yeah, we can pat ourselves on the back for that at least. But the question is, are we going to get it right for this weekend? So, what is your pole position prediction looking like, Luke? Who is going to be on pole for the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix?
Pole is always hard to guess, honestly, especially in this current season. But I think I'm gonna have to go ahead and actually, I'm gonna be a little bit interesting. I think I want to go ahead and say Charles Leclerc. It's something different. I can't guarantee it,
Oh
but
my.
I'm gonna go ahead and be optimistic. I mean, I'm rocking the hat. I'm rocking the number. I'm not gonna not say Ferrari, and I'm gonna say I'm rooting for a Ferrari weekend and a very hopefully a positive experience coming out of this weekend. So yeah, I'll say Charles Leclerc for something definitely for something different.
Okay. That is bold, I have to say.
I'd say so.
But he has had a pole this season, obviously at Hungary. I'm going to go with Lando Norris for mine. I think they seem to have pretty good pace eventually in the practice sessions. And
Eventually, it's
apparently,
fair.
I think some of the teams did say that the McLarens look pretty quick so far. So I think he could just nick pole position. I don't think it'd be by much.
Mhm.
But it might be a bit of a different story into that first corner, as we were saying. So, what's your podium looking like, Luke?
Currently, for my podium, once again, also still tough.
Yeah.
um, but I think I don't know how wild I want to be here. Um, no, I'm going to say that Charles Leclerc is ultimately going to be able to hang on till the end. I think Charles Leclerc is going to go ahead and get his first win of the season.
Wow.
Um, Once again, optimistic as all hell, I know. But I'm going to say that Charles Leclerc is going to get his first win of the season, and he's going to be followed up by Max Verstappen and Lando Norris.
I will be gobsmacked, by the way, if that happens. If
Oh, me
Leclerc can
too.
hang on, I mean, well done. I'll be delighted to see it, to be honest. But I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
sure. I'm not sure about that.
Oh, neither am I.
Um,
Not at all. I have very little faith in the prediction. It's hope. It's hoping against hope. But man, if he could do it, I think everyone
be
would go
amazing.
wild. Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
But unfortunately, Luke, I am
Gonna have to
disagreeing.
disagree.
I'm gonna go with Max Verstappen to win. Although I think it'll be a really tough victory for him compared to previous ones because I think the long run pace wasn't looking too great.
Mhm.
So Max Verstappen to win. I then think Lando Norris will be second. And then I'm going to go with a bit of a wild card and say George Russell in third. I think he'll just pit Piastri to that third place spot. Probably the most
Okay.
common prediction I've given all season is those trio, but just in a slight
I was gonna
different
say.
order. But again, I just think Piastri is just in a bit of a bad run at the minute. I just think he could again just maybe be that fourth place spot just outside the podium. But I
Mhm.
really think Norris is going to have a real go at winning this Sunday, and I think the McLaren looks
That's fair.
quick. So, but I think Verstappen's on a roll at the minute. There's no doubt about it. And I think unless something crazy happens into the first corner, I mean maybe that factors in my Piastri thing as well. Is there could be
Right.
a little bit of, I mean, this is really kind of getting into the if buts and maybes here. What's the chances? Are we seeing a McLaren tangle into the first corner again?
I'm not thinking. I wouldn't think so. I
No.
mean, I definitely don't. I think papaya, or whatever these papaya rules are, they're definitely, as the season goes on, they're less and less in effect. And it's not impossible that we see something, but I don't think it's likely that we see a conflict or whatever. Honestly, I think it's more likely that somebody's gonna, it'd be somebody almost hitting the Red Bull, if anything, just because I know I'm sure that both Lando and Piastri are desperate at this point to keep Verstappen behind.
Well, that is the thing. We're going to find out this weekend, and again, another critical race for the championship. They are all critical races from here on in terms of what happens. If Verstappen has a bad race, you can almost say he could be out of the title race, and that is the same thing for Norris. For Piastri, he desperately needs a good result this weekend, because if he
Exactly.
again gets picked off once more by those two challengers, then it's going to get oh so close with the final races after Mexico. That's pretty much everything then for this week's podcast. Thank you, Luke. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. We'll be back next week to review the Mexican Grand Prix, and then we'll be looking ahead to the Brazilian Grand Prix. I think one of my favourite races of the season, dare I say it. Do you agree with that, Luke?
Oh yeah, and it's always a race that can give you that can give an interesting result. I mean, granted, it's not always expected. Like the Alpines last year definitely didn't deserve that, but it's always a race that gives us something different.
Well, you've got that to look forward to in the next episode that we will be previewing that one. But if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to give it a like on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And then if you're listening on your audio platform of choice, make sure to give us a follow. We'll be back in the next one, and we'll see you then.